Still tired, Mike.
Yeah? Recovering from Max Stock?
I am, in a pretty severe way, too.
Well, you had quite a drive.
Yeah. Well, all right. So, buddy of mine, Justin, drove down. It was 3 hours for him to drive down. He stayed at my place Thursday night and had a great time. You know, we got a chance to spend a little bit of time, just the two of us, just talking through. He does some work for me, so it's kind of a fun deal there. But then we drove to pick up Josh, another friend, which is an hour, 15-minute drive. And then from his place to Macstock, I want to say it was 6 hours, 6.5 hours, somewhere in there. Then we had Macstock, of course, but then you flip and repeat it coming back. And as of this morning, I am finally recovered from this past weekend. And it's been quite the quite the deal. Partially because my schedule was so thrown off. I got a migraine yesterday and fought it all day. So the joys of doing fun events. And I knew I was going to have to pay for things a little bit. Anytime I go out of my normal routines, I always have to deal with something. But I would gladly do it again. It was well worth the trip. I think anyone should go. So, you know, next year, 2019. I got the dates. I got them out of Mike. Did he announce those dates at the end of... Because I didn't get to stay till the whole thing.
To tell you the truth, I'm not sure. I spent most of Sunday afternoon chatting with people, and then I took off before the love notes to Newton. We were hanging out with JF, and we went to Woodstock, just walked around, and then got dinner with Don McAllister, David Sparks, Kelly Gamont, Gene McDonald, and a few other folks before we headed back Sunday night. But we had about a 3-hour drive, so a lot shorter than yours, but I was still spent by the end. I've noticed that the further I can spread out those long drives, the better, which is part of the reason that my wife and I go down there early. Although we think we're going to flip that. Next year, we're going to just stay later. Because this year I was presenting, and I did a pretty good job of compartmentalizing that and getting all my stuff done before we got down there. But still, you're thinking about, well, I have to present twice on Saturday, so you can't really relax.
Right.
And by the time it was over, you know, then I finally feel like I can relax. Plus, you're taking in so much information. You learn from all these really smart people, and it's a lot just to process it all. And by the time the event's over, which it's only 2 days, you feel like you've been drinking from the fire hose, and it's a little overwhelming.
Right.
But it's a ton of fun. It was great to see you again. It was fun to meet friend of the podcast, Justin, and friend of the podcast, Josh, and a whole bunch of other people. So it was really cool.
Yeah, for sure. No, I'll gladly do it again. And I just looked it up. So dates for 2019. All right. So if you're listening to this, you need to go, you know, put this on your calendar because you should come see us next year. July 27 and 28 is when they have it in 2019. And I should put a disclaimer out here. Like, this is why I was interested in getting this, because next year, July 18 is my wife and I's anniversary, Becky and I. Next year will be our 10-year anniversary. So we're planning like this 1 week getaway from the kids and go up in the mountains and go hiking and stuff. So we've been trying to figure out when to do that, but Macstock is always like right on the line of where our anniversary lands. So I'm always on this delicate balance of, can I go or not, depending on if it hits our anniversary. So that's why I was trying to figure out, okay, well, when is this? And then we'll plan our week depending on when Macstock is. So my anniversary trip for our 10-year is being moved dependent on Macstock for next year.
Nice. You should get Becky to come with. There's no mountains to hike down in Woodstock, Illinois.
True.
Rachel comes and she has a blast. She's definitely not an Uber Mac nerd.
I know. I told her she should come, and then, you know, her and Rachel can hang out. Though I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't know if that's a good thing to encourage or not.
Especially if Josh is involved.
That's true. Fun time. So yes, join us for Macstock next year.
Definitely. Another point of follow-up here, we had Bookworm shirts that have gone to print as this is published. We've still got about 24 hours left as we're recording this, but they've gone really well. We've sold 37 so far. I'm hoping to get to 50, but that's already better than Austin Kleon, which I said last episode, that's the one I wanted to beat. So
sorry, Austin.
Well, he's sold more lifetime.
No, don't bring this up. No, we beat him.
Okay, fine. We beat him. No hard feelings. But yeah, these are sweet. There's t-shirts and sweatshirts. So thank you to everybody who supported the podcast and bought a shirt. You're going to get bookmarks and stickers too. So, but this was a fun thing to do, and I can't wait to get my swag.
Yes. And I have a whole bunch of bookmarks and stickers here, thanks to you.
That's just the tip of the iceberg. I meant to give you a whole other thing of bookmarks before you left, but I forgot.
See, I got lucky. I kid you not. I came home with those, and my wife was like, "Well, I guess you could put some in all of the kids' books and stuff where we have, because like I'm reading the Chronicles of Narnia, grouping of books for my girls, but we just had like a note card or something in there. So I went and pulled the note card out and put a bookworm bookmark in there." And then I realized, oh, wait, I usually have two different places in my Bible that I'm maintaining at one place, but I only have one of the ribbon bookmarks in my Bible. I was like, well, perfect. I'll put one of these bookworm bookmarks in that as well. And then my wife was like, well, you might as well swap it out in the book that I'm reading. So I swapped hers out at the same time. And then they're also reading a book for our oldest, for her school. They read a long form book as well. So I went and swapped that bookmark out too. So bookworm bookmarks all over the Bulick household right now. And now I'm still looking for people to give them to. So if you need one and you're in my area, come see me. Mike has loaded me up.
Yes, we have many, many bookmarks. Well, when you run out, let me know. I've got more. All right, should we get to action items from the last episode?
Yes.
All right, so I've got 3 of them, and I think we can go through these fairly quickly. My first one is consider how I can redesign my work. And that's kind of general and vague, but the basic idea from the previous book we did, Great at Work by Morton Hansen, was to figure out the things that you can do that really hit the mark. That's my synopsis of it anyways. And so when I was thinking about how can I redesign my work, that kind of ties into the next action item here, which is to make a list of things I shouldn't be doing. There's a lot of stuff that I do pertaining to the work that I do. And I recognize that the things that I'm really good at, the things that are kind of in line with my unique ability, are the content creation things. And so a lot of the admin type stuff, that's things that I really shouldn't be doing. And I've got a running list of things I shouldn't be doing. I keep adding to it. It's actually kind of fun. And then the challenge there is, okay, so if I shouldn't be doing this thing, it still needs to get done. How can I figure out a way that this can get done? Do I delegate it to somebody else if I'm going to do that? I have to create a whole process for it to make sure that they can do it successfully, yada, yada, yada. But this has been a really cool action item. And I don't see myself stopping doing this anytime soon. This is kind of in line, by the way, with the questions I mentioned regarding the personal retreat, the thinking day. What should I start doing? What should I stop doing? What should I keep doing? This is what should I stop doing, in my opinion. And this is also part of the thing that my wife and I do whenever we have our family meetings every week. We ask those same questions. And so it's kind of always at the front of my mind is like, what should I not be doing? And then taking action and stopping doing those things. That's actually really fun and exciting.
Interesting. I as you're talking, I was creating a new list in OmniFocus called Stop Doing. I'm going to try this. I think this would be cool.
That's right. You're back on OmniFocus. You enjoying your OmniFocus mug that I brought you?
I am. So Mike bought me an OmniFocus coffee mug, and I used it yesterday morning, and my wife goes, what is that? It's like, it's my OmniFocus mug that Mike got me. She's like, of course you have an OmniFocus mug now.
Absolutely.
Yep. Very much appreciated. Love that mug. It's one of my favorites now.
Nice. I'm not sure if this is like an open-ended thing. I found that on society6.com. They've got a couple things that they are doing. Like the Omni Group themselves has a campaign that does that. And Society 6 is kind of like Cotton Bureau, except it's always open and you can do different artsy things. So I think they have like some stickers or templates or things like that as well. But I saw the mug and I was like, oh, this is perfect. I got to get this for Joe.
I appreciate it.
I have one as well.
I figured you did.
My last action item here is to ask open-ended questions. And this is something that I have done. And it's something that I will continue to try to do. But I've noticed this myself just in like the meetings that I've been involved in since we read that book. asking these and just waiting for people to come up with an answer. And at first, there's always some awkward silence because people don't like being put on the spot, especially like some of the team meetings that I've been involved in. They tend to be led/dominated by a couple personalities a lot of times. And it's really easy for people to show up, like not even say hi, because that's just not the way that they do it, even though it's a Skype call. Like that's kind of standard protocol. Everybody says hi, at the beginning. But there are literally people in some of these meetings that will show up and not say a single word and then sign off at the end. And so I've been trying to flip the tables a little bit and ask these questions and even call out people who I know like haven't contributed in a while and be like, hey, so Brian, what do you think about this? What's your opinion? What should we do to solve this problem? And I just think that that's providing value on so many levels. And that kind of ties into one of the Gap books that I had read recently, which is No Fail Meetings, I think, by Michael Hyatt. Short little book, but it talked to this as well. So these open-ended questions, that's one place that I've been asking them. And then also I'm asking them of myself when I do like the personal retreat thinking day, asking those questions. What should I start doing, stop doing, keep doing? Those are kind of open-ended questions. I mean, they're very specific. It's not the same type of question necessarily that you get in those meetings, but I'm just looking for as many opportunities as I can to do this sort of thing. And just in my mind, when I say open-ended questions, like there is no right or wrong answer. It's not a simple process. It's just like throw this out there, and then whatever comes back is acceptable responses, sort of a thing.
Yeah, I like this. I read the book. Maybe we should do this for the show at some point, Mike. I read the book Quiet by Susan Cain, which is all about introverts. And one of the aspects of that was with meetings, asking questions and then requiring everyone to answer them, which some introverts, I'm sure, whenever I said that, just kind of cringed, like, no, don't do that. Like that might be your reaction. But honestly, that's probably one of the best things you can do is pinpoint people and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because most of the time, someone has an opinion. They're just a little nervous about saying it.
Yep, totally. All right, so you got some action items.
I do, and I've actually gotten worse on the first one.
That's not good.
Go figure. First one here is never be the bottleneck, and the intent here is that I'm not the one holding up the work being done in my business, since I have other people who are doing things for me. And thanks to Macstock, though I love it, I am now quite behind and now quite the bottleneck. So I'm trying to catch up with them and trying to get back on top of things there. And it's not actually going to get better for a little while because I'm leaving tomorrow on a camping trip and won't be back until Monday. So it's the way it goes. So I think, if anything, this has been a good time for me to do this because I think it's taught me a lot about, I really do need to figure this out. Like I need to get my act together on this, if you will, just because I know that I shouldn't be the one that's holding things up, and yet it seems like I always am. So I'm still working on it.
You got this, Joe. You got this.
Thanks for the rally cry there. Number 2, measure project time start to finish. I built the systems for this to help track it. I don't have anything to report on it at the moment, other than the logging systems are now completely automatic, such that I know when things start, I know when they finish, and then it creates reports automatically to tell me how did it work out. But I've only had like 3 projects finish up in that amount of time, so I don't really know. Like, it's not enough to tell me, are we in a good place? Or are we in a bad place? Is it getting shorter? Is it getting longer? Like, I don't know any of that. I just know raw data at this moment. So it's in place, so I'm measuring it. So I'm going to say that's quote unquote done, but the analysis of it needs to be done yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the goal here? Just to evaluate whether this project was successful, unsuccessful?
Well, the intent was, because the thing that I know is with my business, the key is starting projects and finishing them. And it's pretty easy for me to get projects started. But once they're started, it's always this dance of trying to get information and trying to get, all the code written and getting deployments done and making sure all the little tiny details are completed. Like that gets to be and can be like months long. And the hope is to get this down to where it's like 3 to 4 weeks start to finish on most projects. Like that's the goal, but I don't really know what my baseline is right now. Are we talking we're taking 3 months down to 3 weeks? Like that seems ridiculous to try to do that. But, that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
Gotcha.
So that's number 2. And then the last one here is build better segmentation in my day. And the intent here is to, it's kind of like the batching thing where I'm batching the types of work and the areas that I'm working on. So I'll have things that I'm doing for, say, the Productivity Guild, or I'm working on things for Whims at Work or Bookworm, like the podcasts, or I'm doing stuff for ProCourse, my business. Like I've got these different areas, but I have a tendency to like sprinkle the work around on each of those and, work on the podcast and then shift over to ProCourse and then come back to the Guild for a little while. Like I have a tendency to jump back and forth. So I've been trying to like block the whole time blocking thing on when am I going to work on different pieces. It's been going okay. Like it's getting there. I think my habits are in a bad place. There's your segue for today's book.
Nicely done.
I feel like my routines, I wasn't even trying. Like it just kind of happened. Whoops. I feel like I've got these, routines that put me in a bad place without even realizing it, which is partly why I chose today's book. So, I'll just take the segue. I'll just take it. It's sitting right there.
Do
it. Today's book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. This is one that's been on my list, Mike, for probably about 2 years now, I think. I don't even know when it came out. 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3 years old. So it's been out for a little while, but not super long. But I know it's been one that I've been wanting to go through for a long time because I refer to my habits a lot. And I know that so much of what I do is habit driven that I just wanted to understand it more. People talk about this book. It's a New York Times bestseller. People rave about it. I can see why. But it's one that I really enjoyed. I'm glad we read it, and I have a lot of habits I feel like I want to tweak now.
All right, me too. So let's jump in here.
All right.
The book is broken down into 3 different parts, which I'm sure we'll talk about these. Part 1 is the habits of individuals. Part 2 is the habits of successful organizations. And part 3 is the habits of society. There's a couple chapters in each one of these sections. The part that you were talking about, which was my initial draw to the book as well, in terms of like, okay, so this is going to tell me how habits work. It's going to tell me how I can implement habits in my own life to be more successful, achieve my goals, whatever, fill in the blank. Okay, cool. Yes. You read section or part 1 and you're like, yeah, this is speaking right to me. And then they kind of lost me in part 2 and part 3. Now, I also want to say that it's hard. It was really hard for me to follow this book because Charles Duhigg is obviously a very smart guy. But there are so many stories in here, and they are all interwoven, and he's jumping back and forth between the different ones. And I found myself like getting them mixed up and getting lost in them. So in each one of these chapters, for example, chapter 1, he's got these Roman numerals, which will show like the different sections within that chapter. And sometimes he'll have a sentence which transitions from one story to the next. Other times he'll just jump from them, and then he tries to like bring them all together to a crescendo and makes like one encompassing statement at the end. Sometimes that worked in my brain, sometimes it didn't. Did you have the same response?
Yeah, I was going through the stories, and I love the stories. Like the stories themselves were kind of cool.
Yeah.
Save Target. We'll get there later.
Target is creepy.
But
don't at me.
But the stories were helpful in understanding, I think, each of those concepts, but trying to get a grasp on what the concept was each time kind of got messy for me.
Yeah.
And I also felt like there were some cases, like I remember one, the story took, I think, 8 pages to get through the single story to illustrate a point that he didn't summarize. And I don't know where it was now. That would be helpful to know, Mike, but I can't place it. But it was a long story, even for a longer book's stance. But I'm with you. It was tough to follow sometimes. I think part 1, I believe I finished part 1 in about one evening, just because I was so fascinated by it. But I'm with you. When part 2 and part 3 came around, like, okay, can we go back to me, like, individually now? Like,
and I'm sure part of that
please?
is our perspective as quote unquote independent knowledge workers. You know, we're not part of a huge organization, and there's a bunch of people above us on the food chain, and we're trying to figure out how to affect the change we want in the organization
True.
by manipulating the habits of the people above us. You know, so I can see how that might be useful information. But yeah, I had the same reaction. So in chapter 1, he explains the habit loop, which is the cue, the routine, and the reward. And I'm not sure. Do you want to dive into that right now?
Sure. I mean, the concept here is there's 3 aspects to a habit that Mike just explained. So the cue, what triggers the habit, the routine, the habit itself, and the reward, the positive feeling or thing that you receive as a result of having done the habit. Now, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's call it breakfast. So for me, here's my habit. I come downstairs in the morning after having taken a shower and gotten dressed for the day. I come down the stairs, and my instant cue is I'm now downstairs in the kitchen. So my cue tells me that, okay, well, now I need to start the tea kettle for the water for my coffee, and then I start my egg pan. And then once I've done that, I have this whole series of things that I do to make sure I've made coffee and I've made my eggs for the morning. And then I get to sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee with my eggs. That's the reward piece. So the cue there is me coming down the stairs into the kitchen, the routine being making my breakfast and coffee, and then the reward being able to enjoy that meal. So you kind of get that. Now, that's a very dumbed down version, I think. Like, that's a very simple. I mean, they can get pretty intense.
Yep.
And very subtle with what the reward itself is. Even with some detrimental things, I'm probably not a good one to talk about, some of the addictive behaviors that have quote unquote positive feelings, those rewards. Things like smoking cigarettes and doing drugs and stuff, like those do have positive feelings to them, and that's why people continue down those addictive habit trails. But that's the process, is that cue, routine, and reward process.
Yeah, and the interesting part that he lays out at the beginning of this book and really carries it through to the end is that without these habit loops, your brain would essentially shut down, overwhelmed by the minutia of your day-to-day life. In fact, in a Duke University study, he mentions at the very beginning, 40% of our actions aren't actual decisions as we go about our day, but they're habits that we've created. And so by understanding this habit loop and learning to observe the cues and the rewards, we can change and manipulate the routines so that they're positive instead of negative. And so like you had mentioned, smoking and drinking, like this is what Alcoholics Anonymous is built off of, is this cue, routine, reward. And he gets into this in chapter 3. But all they're doing is they are substituting the routine of going to the bar and having a drink and still maintaining the same cue and the reward. And so he's got this little graphic of the habit loop that he introduces in chapter 1. He uses different versions of this to explain the different stories that he shares over and over and over again. But if you understand this simple mental model, like you can kind of plug this in and apply it to a lot of different situations, like you said, in your life. What's interesting about this is, and he starts the book off really strongly by telling this story of Eugene, who had major brain damage, and his memory was completely gone based on the part of the brain that he had lost, but he could still perform his daily habits and even establish new habits like going for a walk, which was crazy because according to the physiology, he shouldn't be able to do any of this stuff, but he's managing to do it anyways. Like he's cooking himself breakfast, he's going for a walk, he's got like his whole day-to-day routine. And basically the doctors are like, how in the world is he doing this? Like the part of the brain that he would use to do these sorts of things isn't there. And really what they identified was that it's the power of these habits that have been ingrained. And also in this section, he talks a little bit about chunking, which we learned about in Peak. This is an interesting idea because chunking is the process in which the brain converts a sequence of actions into an automatic routine. So even though I forget what part of the brain it was that he had removed, but like even though he didn't have that part of his brain anymore, his brain was still able to apply this idea of chunking to create these new habits. And this is applicable to everybody because these habits are what allow our brain, basically your brain is always looking for ways to save energy. And so it's going to flip into these habit loops whenever it can. And he's got examples of like the rats in the maze who are trying to get the chocolate and the monkeys who are trying to get the grape juice. And they're measuring their mental activity. And what they're recognizing is that it spikes, when they are anticipating the reward. But the routine itself, like that doesn't consume a whole lot of mental energy. And so if you're going to get like one thing out of this book, it's that, and then you can figure out how to apply that to your own life. You don't need to read part 2 or part 3.
I thought Eugene's story was interesting because they would ask him, like, can you tell me where the kitchen is? I was like, well, they had moved to a different house. And he's like, no, I don't know where the kitchen is. And just a couple minutes later, they would ask him, are you hungry? Like, why don't you go get a snack? And he would walk straight to the kitchen, open the cupboard, and grab a can of nuts for a snack. It's like, well, he didn't even know where the kitchen was, let alone snacks in the kitchen. Like, he didn't even, It was so interesting to see, like, okay, well, he knows these habits. Like, he knows his way there, but he can't tell you his way there.
Yep.
But they had a bunch of tests like that where they would ask him, do you know how you're doing this? No, it's weird. I'm just guessing, and it's coming out right all the time. Well, you know this by building habits. Like, it's just happened over and over and over again.
Yeah, and so you don't have to be Eugene trying to survive. You can be Joe or Mike or anybody else just trying to figure out how to manipulate your systems of your life so that it's a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient. You don't have to do the things that you don't want to do. You have more in the tank for the things that you do want to do. And that's kind of where chapter 2 comes in, the craving brain, because the habits are formed when your brain anticipates the reward. So with Eugene's example, what's triggering that, maybe it's the doctor or whoever's saying, are you hungry? But it could just be an ad that he sees on TV, or the fact that the radio is playing in the background. Like these things could all be cues, and then your brain is anticipating that reward. That creates the craving, which is what drives the habits. And so if you want to, quote unquote, hack your habits, what you need to do is figure out how to spark those cravings, which makes creating the habits even easier. And you can do this personally, but there are people and companies that do this on a large scale too. In this chapter 2, he shares a couple different stories of Pepsodent and Febreze. So Pepsodent was the toothpaste, and really what they did is they created this toothpaste, but the thing that made it stick, the thing that caused homes with toothpaste to rise from 7% to 65% with Pepsodent, was this trigger by a cue. So what they did is they put, like, I'm not sure what exactly it was, but it caused the toothpaste to like tingle on your teeth. It's a little bit of a reaction that your teeth have, and it has nothing to do with the toothpaste's ability to actually clean the teeth, but that feeling is the thing that people anticipated, and that's what they wanted, was that was their reward, the feeling that their teeth were clean, even whether they were clean or not. And then that's the thing that got it to stick.
It made it feel clean.
Febreze too. I mean, they had this awesome product which they tested with this person, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this changed my life," because she was like a ranger, and she was working outside with animals and skunks and stuff, and she was like, "I just want to have a normal life. I want to date somebody," But they come back to my place, they can smell the skunks, and they bail. So she's like in tears, saying like the spray that they made to eliminate odors, this is going to change my entire life. But they couldn't get other people to adopt it, and really what they had to do was change the way that it was perceived. So yeah, it got rid of the stink in a room, but really what they did is they showed people spraying it after they had cleaned their room. So it wasn't the fact that the room stunk and they needed the spray. They just used it as a reward for, okay, now my room is clean, and people felt good about that, and that's what caused it to catch on. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, because it has nothing to do with the quote unquote value proposition of the product itself. They had to position it a totally different way, kind of like a frivolous thing, in order to get people to buy it.
Yeah, and this plays in a little bit to like how to change a habit, which I think is interesting. You know, if you're doing something and you want to break a habit or you want to change it, what they tell you is to take the cue, the thing that triggers that routine, leave the cue the same, change the routine, and try to maintain your reward. So the only thing it changes is that middle piece. And when you're talking about this in your personal life, like that makes a lot of sense, and it can be fairly easy. Like if I want to change up my morning routine, like I could change it to where when I come downstairs into the kitchen, I go for a run and then I come back and enjoy the feeling of having gone for a run. Like I could say that would be the change there as opposed to doing breakfast. That sounds like a horrible idea to me, but that's something that you could do. But with these companies, what they were doing, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later because companies do it on a larger scale, but what they're doing is trying to play into an existing habit or create a new habit that revolves around a reward that's very strongly desired and trying to capitalize on it. We'll talk about Target. I think we're gonna keep alluding to Target because Target is creepy.
We have justification for that statement, but if anybody who reads this is going to come to the same conclusion that, oh, that's kind of creepy, based on some mistakes that they made. But in reality, just about every online retailer is doing the same thing now.
Yeah.
We're getting back to exactly what you were just describing about the morning routines and kind of hacking these things. Chapter 3, there's a couple concepts which kind of tie into one of my action items here, and that is awareness training. So this is something that AA does with the people who come to them because they want them to be able to recognize when that cue is happening so that they can substitute the routine and they don't just go to the bar automatically. But awareness training is basically asking the patient to describe what triggers their habitual behavior. And so a lot of this stuff is so automatic that you never really think about it. I want to think about my habits and I guess, apply awareness training to myself. And then apply habit reversal therapy, which he talks about in this chapter, which is recreating habits based off of those cues and rewards and putting in what he defines as a competing response, a different routine to focus on when you feel that impulse or craving. There's a couple examples they used in this chapter of like the person who was biting their nails to show that you really can do this, but you have to identify these pieces if you want to kind of swap them in and out, plug and play sort of thing. So that's something that I want to do. I want to evaluate, and it may take a while, all of the different routines and habits that maybe I'm not even aware of. Obviously, I've got my morning routine. Like that's something that we've talked about previously in action items, and I've got my set things that I do every morning, but really 40% of my day, that's a good chunk of my day that I'm defaulting to these habits. So I want to recognize what's really going on.
Do you have any specific habits that you feel like you already know about that you want to change?
Well, putting me on the spot. I think that
I win. Yes.
Yeah. I think that I have a little bit of trouble disconnecting at the end of my day. I know we've talked about like a shutdown routine or something like that. I don't think I have one of those, so my brain just kind of stays in work mode if I don't do that. That's probably one example of a negative routine. And again, I'm gonna have to do some thought about what are the cues and the rewards with that. I also think that at the end of the day, my bedtime routine specifically, like there's room for improvement there because the cue obviously is I'm tired. The kids are finally in bed. So what am I going to do? And lately it's been sit down and watch a baseball game or an old movie. Like my wife is really into, and me too, the Thin Man series of like 1920s black and white murder mysteries.
All right.
So that's not a real productive use of the last hour or two of my day. Although there's a lot of good things too, like I get a notification at 9:45 that it's time to journal, and I launch my reflection routine. So I don't know. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Although if I'm aware of how I'm spending my time during my workday, there's probably a lot of other stuff that I could improve.
Fair point. I only ask because this is an action item I have as well. I saw that you wrote it down here, and it's kind of what I had on my own list, but you wrote it better. of identifying the current routines and habits. And I know that like whenever it comes to that shutdown ritual, that with that, like I have one, but I don't always stick to it, and that's a problem. And it's partly because I am just not ready to be done doing the thing I'm doing at the time when I need to stop. And I feel like I can just work on this a little bit longer instead of doing this routine. And I shouldn't do that.
Right.
So I need to think through that habit or the lack thereof and figure out how to cement that. But that's one in particular. That's just one example there. But I feel like there are a lot of these that I'm not even aware of yet, to your point.
Yep.
So that's what I want to look for, because I know there are some, like the evening thing, like for me, that one's already locked in. Like I know exactly, you tell me it's bedtime and I have this whole series of maybe 50 things that happen that I don't even realize what I'm doing. It just is automatic. So there is a lot of that I already do. The morning is the same way, but midday I feel like is kind of just fluid.
Yeah. Another one for me, kind of related though, is they talk about how fast food is engineered. That makes it sound really gross, and I'm sure it is. But fast food's engineered to trigger the habit loop. And this is something that I struggle with specifically on days when I'm super busy, like Thursdays, for example. I've got a discipleship group of guys at my church, and that we meet every Thursday at like 5:30, and then after that at 7 we've got worship team practice. So I don't get home till late on Thursday. And there are other times too where it's like I'm going when it would be a convenient mealtime, and I maybe stayed up too late the night before, so I'm not prepared the night before, and it's like lunchtime and I don't have a lunch ready. And so it's like, I'm going to go get some food. And my weakness is Culver's. Do they have Culver's in Minneapolis? I'm pretty sure they do. It's like a Midwestern thing, right?
I have one less than a mile from my house.
Yeah, it's butter burgers and cheese curds. So good. But I eat them too often. So definitely a habit I need to break.
I'm not a fan of fast food. I am convinced that part of my, difficulty with transitioning back from having gone to Macstock was partly because of diet and such. So, yeah, I get it. I do. I need to not do... my wife is very particular about what we eat. And as a result, like anytime I deviate from that diet heavily, like I'm going to pay for it. And I just know it. So I'm not real good about sticking with it when I'm not with her. As odd as that sounds. So yes, I need to improve that as well. But I don't really have a thing for fast food. Like that particularly is not something that has appealed to me for quite some time. So I can't say that that's a thing I struggle with. Sorry.
Well, Culver's is kind of borderline fast food. I think it's still classified as fast food, but it's not like been sitting under a heat lamp forever, which is part of the reason why I justify it, because it tastes so good and it's healthier than McDonald's or whatever. So,
okay,
but yeah,
no, whatever you need to tell yourself, Mike.
No, I'm saying I gotta break that. I gotta plan ahead and I gotta eat good food.
Okay, go for it. Where are we at on this outline?
Part 2.
Okay.
The habits of successful organizations. In chapter 4, this part really doesn't have to do anything with successful organizations. This is it could be classified in the previous section, in my opinion. This is the whole idea of keystone habits. I get why they classify it here. They tell the story of Paul O'Neill, who completely turned around a company by focusing on a keystone habit, which in his case was safety. And in fact, when he took over, people thought he was kind of crazy for emphasizing this when the company was going under. But, he was successful. The story I really liked in this section, though, was the Michael Phelps story. And I've heard different versions of this, which actually that's another point I should point out about this book, is that a lot of these stories I have heard before in different contexts. And so when he told these stories, he has a really good way of telling just the pieces he wants to tell.
Yes.
To support his point, which I get, but also when you tell like part of a story that you already know, you're kind of left with this impression that, well, that was kind of spun, like it's not the whole truth. That's kind of how I felt about this Michael Phelps story, but this is such a cool story. So are you familiar with this?
I've heard this, I don't know how many times. So yes, I'm very familiar with it.
Well, I'll just recap it really, really briefly then for the 3 listeners that haven't heard this. But Michael Phelps has a keystone habit. And again, these keystone habits, these are the ones that kind of kick off the whole process. So some habits matter more than others. That's really the idea here. And you can apply this to an organization, but you can also apply this to an individual level, which is what Michael Phelps is doing. So Michael Phelps is the most successful swimmer in the history of the world, but he wasn't always, and he dealt with some stuff that his coach kind of had to get him into these keystone habits of visualization and relaxation. And the really cool story that they tell in the book that's kind of the manifestation of this is in 2008 during the Beijing Olympics. He's in, I think it's the 100-meter butterfly finals, and his goggles break, so he can't see at the end of the race. And at the end of the race, he's stretching out. He wins by like 100th of a second, because he didn't take another stroke, and the guy next to him did. Now that can go back though to this keystone habit that he and his coach have created of visualizing himself swimming this race over and over and over again. In fact, when Michael Phelps jumps up on the platform, his coach has the trigger phrase, the cue, put in the videotape. And that's Michael Phelps' cue to play through the entire race. So he stays calm. He wins the gold medal anyway with a world record time. And they're interviewing him after the race and like, what was it like to swim blind? Because people can't wrap their head around like, how is he able to stay calm during this? And he says, it felt like I imagined it would. Like he had swam that race so many times in his head that the physical manifestation of that was just like, oh, no big deal. And I think that's a really powerful concept.
It's just another day in the pool.
Yep, exactly.
Just the way it goes. I think it's really interesting how that played such a big part in just how he swims or swam. I guess he doesn't compete anymore, does he? I think he's done.
I think so, but I don't know that for sure. I mean, he doesn't need to, that's for sure. I think he had like 22 gold medals and the guy in second place had 9 or something like that. So
right.
He's proven himself. He doesn't need to compete anymore.
Yep. He can win. It's okay. Good luck trying to beat him. No, I like that this is a keystone habit here. And, he goes through a number of what these habits are, in the book. He does talk about these in the individual life as well. One of which was, if I can recall, was exercise, I think.
Yep.
Like if you built the habit of exercise, other areas of your life tended to come into order as well. And it became like a crux that everything folded around. So I think that's an interesting point, and it's one that I know, like I've talked about my morning routine before, but this particular section struck me with, I have had a few bad habits in the morning of things like, and I've mentioned this on the show before, like checking my email right away to make sure nothing fell apart overnight. Like that sort of thing has been something I've struggled with for a long time. Well, not long ago, I put myself in a position where I was putting my phone downstairs. It was in my office, my home office, whenever I'd go to bed, which means it's not even in the bedroom. And although that is terrifying for some people and, something that kind of makes me nervous once in a while. So, well, what if somebody, what if there's an emergency and I need to, act on it? Like, well, I suppose maybe there's I don't know, but the chances of there being an emergency in the night that I need to act on that can't wait for 4 hours, like that seems pretty rare to me. I feel like it would be okay, but that side of things, out the window here. Like I keep my phone downstairs. That's the important part here. Part of the reason for that is because I don't want to start my day with that bad jump, like that kickstart to the day. So having it downstairs means it's not even an option. Like I go through my morning routine without it entirely because it's not even an option for me to pick up because it's in my office. So I guess I could go get it, but it seems silly to me to go out of my way to go get a distracting device. Like that seems silly, and I can't bring myself to actually follow through on that. So it works out pretty good in that sense. But what I have found in the week or so that I've been doing this, week and a half or so, is that actually has a lot of impacts around device usage that I wasn't aware of. I think this might be a keystone habit that I'm not sure on this, Mike. So I think what has been going on, because I found myself leaving my phone places more and more often. I don't know if that's good or bad. Hopefully I don't leave it behind somewhere. But I have found that I have zero problems just leaving it across the room, and it's not even, like, it's not within arm's reach. Like right now, I don't even know where it's at. It's somewhere over on, I don't know. It's somewhere behind me at the moment. But it's not on my desk. It's not within arm's reach right now. And that sort of thing is interesting because I've found that over the last week and a half, I've gotten to where my tendencies to want to go pick it up and do those just checks, those quick, just tell me what's going on in the world. What would that be? Like a FOMO piece, like fear of missing out, relief of sorts. I don't really do that right now. Like I still feel that urge, but it's not one that strikes me near as much as it used to. And I think that's derived from, you know, this shift in how I've been handling my phone at night. So I don't know. I think I would recommend it. I don't know if I would recommend it for everyone, but it's at least something that's been interesting to me.
Yeah, so let's analyze Joe Duhigg for a moment here. Okay,
right, so your psychoanalysis begin.
Your cue is the FOMO, the feeling that I need to see what's going on. And then the reward that you're looking for is ultimately peace of mind. Okay, so the routine, you substituted pulling out your phone, checking your email for leaving it downstairs.
Yes.
And I would argue that the real reward that you're after, that peace of mind, like you get that with this new routine. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool example of how you can look at the cues and say, okay, this is the thing that my monkey brain wants to respond to automatically. What can I do which is going to steer it in the direction that I want it to go? And in your case, and a lot of people's case, physically removing the temptation is the way to go. I think that's a great idea. And I would argue that it is something everybody should at least think about. I use my phone because I use Sleep Cycle. It's right next to my bed, and it's tracking my sleep patterns through the microphone. But that's a trade-off I'm willing to make. I totally get the rationale behind what you do, and I think it's a great example. So yeah, I would say that is a keystone habit, because whether you reach for your phone or not, that's going to trigger a whole bunch of other things. So maybe it's just email. Maybe it's email and social media. You know, maybe there's a huge list of things that you go check every time you pull your phone out of your pocket. So that's the keystone habit that you want to change.
Yes, to all the things. Yeah, that was a good psychoanalysis. Well done, Mike.
Just call me Dr. Mike.
All right, Doc.
All right, so let's go to the next section here, which is Chapter 5, Starbucks and the Habit of Success. So this chapter I have a little bit of an issue with. Not rant-worthy, I don't think, but maybe. We'll see.
Okay.
All right, so he talks a lot in this particular chapter about the idea of willpower, which
all right.
Kind of spoke to willpower not being as important as motivation. I think I kind of am in that camp. But the thing that really bugged me about this is he uses the example of Starbucks, which completely changes the one guy's life. And they say on page 131 that willpower is the single most important keystone habit for individual success. He shares some stats. I think these stats are deceiving, though, because I have seen lots of stats like this that point to soft skills or emotional intelligence. And that's really what Starbucks is teaching. It is not just willpower. So this kind of backs up my thought that he tells these stories, but he tells part of the story. And I didn't really like that in this particular part because, yeah, willpower is maybe a soft skill, but there's a huge list of other things that contribute to an individual's success as well. And really, like, the encompassing term for all of these soft skills is emotional intelligence. So it's not just your academic intelligence, your hard skills, the ability to do the math and things like that, but the examples they share, like what do you do when you have an upset customer, and then they role play, like why might this customer be upset, or how can you show empathy to this person? Like in the examples, they show so many different soft skills at work, but they kind of lump it all in this book and in this story under willpower. And I didn't really like that.
Do you think, so willpower being a soft skill, do you think in order to work on willpower itself, you have to also work on other soft skills in order to get there? Or do you feel like it's a single thing that you can work on your own, like just individually?
I think you could work on willpower alone. Willpower, they talk about in this chapter that it's like a muscle more than a skill. It gets tired, like the cookie and radish experiment. You know, the cookie eaters gave up after 19 minutes, the radish eaters after 8 minutes because their willpower was depleted. So I do think that there's something to that, but I also think that there's a whole bunch of self-regulatory skills that they call them in here. It's really like self-determination, academic and academic, career, personal success. Like it's all encompassed in the ability to set and achieve a goal. And then if you have the emotional intelligence skills that can help you get there. So some of that is communication. I mean, you're not going to be working in a vacuum. No matter where you work, you're going to have to get along with other people. You're going to have to get along with your customers. And so those communication skills, like they're talking about that in this section too, but they lump it under this willpower, and they think that, you know, or the way he described it, and I forget the guy's name, I should have wrote it down, that the story that they tell, I think maybe it's Anthony. I'll just use Anthony as an example. They think that like what made Anthony successful, even though he had all this stuff going on, you know, his mom and dad are dying from a drug overdose, but he's able to turn his life around because of willpower. Kind of, but willpower is just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can develop. You can work these things. You can increase your capacity. So if you wanted to view it like a muscle, you could. But I also think that, I mean, I used to work for a family business, and we had assessments and skill building systems which identified where you were with these emotional intelligence skills or these soft skills, and then a whole research-based skill development process to develop these skills. And some of the research behind like where you were before to where you are after you do this, like it's astounding how much you can change both personally and professionally, how much you can impact your success when you focus on these soft skills. So again, like Starbucks in the habit of success, I agree with this. You know, Starbucks is teaching soft skills, and that is translating into success, but he kind of spins it in this chapter, and he's like, no, it's willpower. Just willpower. Don't worry about any of the other stuff. Just get willpower. Like, nah, not so much.
I looked it up. His name was Travis. It wasn't Anthony.
Travis. Okay. Thank you.
Travis Leach, to be more specific. I could tell you that this chapter, something was off on it, and I couldn't tell you. Like when I read it, I was like, okay, this sounds great. Something's not right here. Like I had that feeling. So thank you for calling this out, because I think that's maybe what I was concerned with, is that with them focusing on saying this is all about, focusing just on willpower. Like, yeah, I think, and they're teaching a lot of other things there too. Like, sure, willpower is there, but they're also teaching like conflict resolution. Like they're teaching a whole bunch of things, not just
exactly.
I mean, maybe you could argue willpower is the crux of each of those other soft skills that they're teaching, maybe. But I feel like there are, probably another 15 or 20 other skills they're teaching at the same time, but they're basically building a course for their employees on how to deal with people. So, that's essentially what they're doing, which makes a lot of sense. How do you win friends and influence people? Welcome to Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not just willpower. Willpower is a part of it, and I get it. Willpower is probably the key ingredient when you're talking about establishing new habits. Like that's going to be the thing that's going to help you to stick with the new routine that you're creating here.
Right.
But then maybe pick some different stories. I mean, the Roy Baumeister research, I like that. I've heard that a bunch of times with the cookie eaters and the radish eaters. But I kind of feel like there's some stories that were shoehorned in here in this particular chapter, and even one of the quotes by one of the researchers, Mark Muravin, says, if you want to do something that requires willpower, like going for a run after work, you have to conserve your willpower muscle during the day. And I put in my comments, or eat your frog. You could do it at the beginning. And so that's an example of like, you can use willpower as a lag measure and say, well, I didn't go for my run this afternoon. I guess I didn't have enough willpower. But how does that actually help you in the moment? I think being able to manufacture the motivation to do the things is more important. And you could view habit creation that way too, I think.
I think I'm with you. I see, this is another reason I like Bookworm, because although I knew something was off with this chapter, I couldn't tell you exactly what it was. And then we sit here and talk about it, and then Mike tells me what it was that was bugging me about it. So this is another reason I like Bookworm, Mike. You tell me what I'm missing on things.
Awesome. Should we move on to chapter 6?
Sure.
All right.
The one we've been waiting for? No, not the one we've been waiting
that's
for.
The next
we'll talk
one.
about Target
I
next.
really like chapter 6, though. Chapter 6 is the power of a crisis. And there's a couple stories in here which I actually found myself getting emotional when I read these. Like the London Underground story and then the Rhode Island Hospital, where the nurses basically were not empowered to act. So they would call out things. And I guess maybe because I thought of the Atul Gawande book, the Checklist Manifesto, and how that process was implemented specifically to solve situations like this. Like one of the stories they tell, they operated on the wrong side of the guy's head.
Right.
And he died.
Right. Now, quick side note, can I interject here?
Yeah.
So because of Atul Gawande's, because, Checklist Manifesto is a book that, has meant a lot to me. Thanks, go listen to the draft episode. Whenever, and I'm not going to go into this here, but we were in the hospital. My wife had to have a surgery, and it was unexpected. And I was like quizzing people. I was like, okay, do you guys have a checklist for these things? Have you run through all of this? Like, here I am, like, I'm asking these questions because I know the importance of this.
Yeah.
And there were a couple times they're like, well, we have one. We don't usually run it. It's like, would you just do me a favor and run it, please? Just for my sake. And they did. So it made me happy that they did that. So thanks, Atul, for making me aware of this.
Yeah. And in this particular book, talking about the Rhode Island Hospital, he tells one example where a nurse actually called out the correct protocol, and the doctor basically belittled her or the surgeon in the operation room. He's like, oh, well, you can effing do the surgery then. And I was like, man, this guy died because you're a jerk.
Right.
And but what's really more important even than the fact that happened is like how they fixed it. And so with both like the London Underground, where there was wooden escalators, which I thought was kind of weird, but
it seems odd to me that they would allow that.
Yeah, so there were wooden escalators underground, and there was a fire, and because of all the different I don't know, the divisions basically, and everybody being like, well, it's not my job, I'll get in trouble if I do something about that. There's this big fire and 30 some people died, which is horrible. But then like the things that happened after that, like in the hospital example, they completely turned the hospital around. Now it's getting all sorts of awards. And really the point that stood out to me and the challenge to me is that great leaders don't let crisis like that go to waste. Because when you're in an organization or a business or a firm, you're guided by these long-held organizational habits, and routines and habits allow truces to be made. He called it like a constant civil war. So there's all these truces that are happening all the time between these potentially warring groups or individuals within an organization in order to get anything done. And so the prime time to capitalize on shifting those habits or those routines happens when there is a crisis and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is unacceptable. We have to change this. And so I guess, next time that there is a quote unquote crisis in a team or an organization that I'm involved with, don't freak out and be like, oh, I can't believe this is happening, but rise to the occasion and figure out, okay, how can we affect positive change through this thing that's happened?
I think that crisis is interesting because it comes up a lot with, I don't, how do I term it? Maybe religious organizations. in Christian circles, it seems to come up a lot because crisis moments are when people change. Like big things change in those moments. And any sort of a religious organization tends to see those as opportunities to speak into somebody's life in some way. And I would say the same thing. Whenever I left my last job and went out on my own, like that was a borderline crisis situation for me. It was a major change. And as a result of that, a lot of my habits changed, some for the better, some not so much. But anytime there's a major shift like that, it can lend itself to some pretty major... It's a great motivator. One of the things I do as the IT director at our church is I run sound. And as someone who runs sound, you end up doing things like funerals and weddings and such. And I don't do a lot of weddings, but I do a lot of funerals. And it's uncanny the things that people will talk to you about in those moments. And it's not a fun conversation usually, but in those times, people are willing to make some pretty major changes. They have a lot of questions that they want to ask or get answers to. But it's just fascinating to me how something relatively small in terms of what happened can be something extremely major because of what that thing is. If someone's dying, like it's technically it's just another event in life. It's just the last stage here, depending on how you look at that.
Yep.
But it can have a major view into how you think as well. So I don't really know where I'm going at it from there, but it has a pretty big impact.
Oh, I could take it from there because that's actually a perfect segue into the next chapter, because part of and this is where we say that Target is creepy. Because Target figured out, and actually Andrew Pohl is the guy in the book, so not all of Target, but Andrew Pohl is creepy. So he identified that customers going through major life events, like you mentioned a funeral, but also in this specific example, having a baby, they don't notice or care that their buying patterns have changed. Okay, and I put in parentheses, but retailers like Target do, because major life changes make people more vulnerable to intervention from individuals. Like in your instance, somebody sitting down with you as you're leaving your one job and you're going on your own. That's a positive intervention, but marketers can use that for, shall we say, less than noble gains. So you're also vulnerable to intervention from marketers, and they talk about how the North American new baby market is worth $36.3 billion per year. It's basically the holy grail of marketing, these new parents. And so people came to Andrew Pohl and they said, can you help us figure out when people are pregnant? And he did. He cracked the formula. He identified 25 different products that, when analyzed together, could tell him what trimester a woman was in and guesstimate her due date. And there's one story in there where they sent, and this is where like they made some mistakes and they dialed it back, but everybody's doing this at some level now. They had sent something to this guy's teenage daughter about like a flyer for diapers or something. And the guy came in and he's all furious and he's like, "Are you trying to get my daughter pregnant?" And then like a week later, they call him and they apologize, and he's like, "Actually, I owe you an apology." Turns out she is pregnant.
She was pregnant.
Yeah. So like all they did was identify the cues based off of her other buying habits, and they were right. And he had no idea, even though she's living in his house. Not making a moral judgment on that, but like it's kind of creepy to think that from a few purchases they can tease out that sort of thing. So the challenge for retailers is, how do you take advantage of people's buying habits because you want to make more money without being creepy like that? And I don't know that I'm not sure that we've as a society found a middle ground for this yet. I think the debate's still raging.
Well, I know that within so I used to be a data analyst, and the types of things that Andrew Pohl was and maybe is still doing for Target, like it wasn't to that level, but I did a lot of data analysis for ag companies. It wasn't over customers, it was over product data, just how do you make the products better. So I understand what he's doing, The technicalities in his case are a little bit beyond me, but I do see a lot of what he's doing as normal. But I know that one of the things that some of the data circles that I run in tend to talk about with this marketing side of it is that they're trying to keep things that seem random and yet are targeted. And I think this is where like they ended up with it saying, we still push a bunch of ads for expecting moms within like a month of them becoming pregnant. And they will still push those ads, but they will mix them in randomly with other ads for things they have zero interest in.
Exactly.
So every ad that ends up in your mailbox is specifically targeted to you, and your neighbor's got something very different. And that is what they do. They are good at it. And I think that's becoming the norm, is make it feel random, but have it be targeted. And that's kind of weird to me. Like the thought of these things coming in and they're specifically geared towards my purchasing habits. Although I kind of like that, I'm kind of freaked out by it too. So, Target. Now, I will say this is a story I've heard multiple times. Like this is not a new thing to me. Had you heard this Target story before?
No, I had not.
Okay. This was, it's been around. Maybe it's because I run in these data circles a little bit, but it's in the marketing and data world, like that is a story that's been told multiple times. And it's one I've heard a lot of times. And I will tell you that he specifically picked out the pieces on this one as well.
I figured.
Like there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. Again, like that's one of the issues I have with this book.
But is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily, unless you don't like the conclusion that he's drawing from the story, I guess.
Because he's trying to make a point.
Yeah, and for the most part, I agree with his points. Like the supporting story that he tells in this chapter is about they've got this song that they're sure is going to be a hit.
Yep.
I think it was Hey Ya by Outkast. And they start playing it and nobody likes it. They're always changing the station. They're like, what the heck? We know this is going to be a popular song, but it's not. So how do we salvage this? And basically what they figured out is that people don't change the radio because they dislike a song. They change it because it's unfamiliar. So they sandwich it in between two favorites. And that's the same approach that works for Target when they're targeting or marketing to new moms. So they're going to give you the diaper ads, but they're going to put it in between some other things, which are not going to blatantly say, hey, we looked at our data and we know you're having a baby. But I do think there's one statement in here which I actually put in the notes. This is creepy. Soon, he says, soon it will be possible for marketers to know our tastes and predict our habits better than we do ourselves. Which, man, the what's it called? Retargeting ads, where like you go look at something on Amazon and then all of a sudden everywhere you go, you see ads for that thing. Like that's kind of what this is all about. I guess for me, my reaction when I see that stuff is, well, first of all, it's always like audio gear. So it's microphones and things, but, also, it kind of shows me that like, I think about this a lot. Maybe it's not as big a deal as I'm making it out to be. Maybe I should shift my focus a little bit. But also like, I get, that every time they bring that in front of you, you're more likely to follow through and buy that thing. So I don't know. I don't like the fact that this could be taken to a whole nother level and people know me better than I know myself. Like that's just kind of a creepy thought just based off of data, but I can totally see how that plays out. Even though I'm not a data analyst, I've never heard this story before. I don't work in this world. I mean, there's a reason that Google gives so much stuff away for free just for some personal information. And I mean, depending on your position, maybe you're okay with that trade-off, maybe you're not. I mean, there's definitely two camps on that, and some people just choose to use different services. That's fine. Apple takes a very different approach, and we don't even have access to your data. We can't get it, even if the FBI tells us we need to. San Bernardino shooter case, I guess like my personal reaction to this is I don't like this, and I want to do everything I can to limit that.
I wish you all the best.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, I know.
As somebody who builds websites and knows the data side of it, good luck.
Yeah.
Like I know how some of that stuff is built. It's tough to keep it clean, even with things like ad blockers and stuff. Yeah, it gets tough. Basically, I think the only way to do it is stay off the internet entirely. And even then,
Yeah, I know.
Good luck. You still have a physical address. You still use a card.
Yeah, it's one of those things that there probably isn't any recourse for individuals who really want to keep their data private, other than to just use cash for everything.
Yeah.
And never sign up for anything. Like you said, never use the internet. But I don't know, still, like, subconsciously, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, even though I know this stuff is happening and I kind of go along with it anyways. Like, I don't like it. I feel dirty sometimes.
Yeah.
When I see those retargeting ads, I'm like, ah.
I have turned down a couple projects that are specifically geared for this sort of thing. That might make you feel a little bit better. There are people fighting back on the development side of things, but there are a lot of developers out there, so I'm sure they got it built anyway. But I've had 2 different clients that wanted me to build some tools that were designed to track information that people haven't provided to them, and I told them no on that. So, that's something it's tough. Those were good projects from a business stance. It hurts a little bit to pass those up once in a while, but
yeah,
I can't bring myself to do it. I don't like that stuff.
All right, should we go to the part 3?
Yeah, let's stop talking about Target.
All right. So part 3 is the habits of societies, and there's a couple chapters here. Chapter 8 is called Saddleback Church and the Montgomery Bus Boycott. Really weird to see these two tied together.
Yeah.
I get the points that he's making. Again, like the Rosa Parks story, I'm familiar with this story. I've given a Toastmasters speech on this topic and feel like he got part of the story. He filled in some blanks actually too with some other details, which was kind of cool. But also, I don't know, just feel manipulated every time I read his story after the emotional intelligence thing. But to summarize this, he says that there's 3 different pieces in the DNA of a movement. So number 1, it starts because of the social habits of friendship and the strong ties between close acquaintances. Number 2, it grows because of the habits of a community and the weak ties that hold neighborhoods and clans together. Let's come back to weak ties in a second. And then number 3, they endure because a movement's leaders give participants new habits that create a fresh sense of identity and a feeling of ownership. All right, so weak ties are friends of a friend, people that you don't really know, but they're really the key piece to keeping a movement going. And so in the example of the Montgomery bus boycott, the thing happened to Rosa Parks, and he kind of tells how like Martin Luther King Jr. was reluctantly like dragged into this thing, and then he became the spokesperson, and then it just kind of swept through the community because it was kind of like, well, I don't know anybody who's going to do this, but everybody's doing it. And so, everybody boycotted the bus system in Montgomery in the African-American community. And that's kind of what led to in his opinion, the paraphrasing the whole chapter, but that kind of was the first domino in a lot of civil rights stuff.
Yeah, I got lost on some of this. I'm not gonna lie. I get a lot of what he's trying to say, but I struggled with connecting all of his dots. I think this has kind of been your point over and over again.
Yep.
That's probably the one tricky part here with this book. I think the story of hearing how things went down in Montgomery, I think it's interesting, and there's a lot of historical background there. I have a thing for history as well, so like that side of me is like, yeah, this is really cool. Let's check this out. But the other side of it's like, well, okay, I feel like you're trying to force your way into saying these are habits. Basically, what you're telling me is this whole movement started because of peer pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my take on it. It's like, well, is peer pressure a habit? I don't really feel like it is.
Yeah.
So, unless I'm wrong in that sense, you used the wrong story here. I don't know.
Right. Well, that's kind of where the Saddleback piece comes in, because Saddleback is, I think, now like the biggest church in the United States. But it started by this guy who was poring over research trying to find the place in the country that had the most unchurched people or something like that. And then the way that he has, Rick Warren, the way that he's grown Saddleback, according to this book, is that he's created the whole concept of, or really leveraged the whole concept of these small groups. And the small groups were really designed to encourage people to build their own habits. Everybody signs a maturity covenant card, which is a social promise, which triggers that peer pressure that you were talking about. And then from there, like, they're self-feeders. In fact, he even says, page 235, if you try to scare people into following Christ's example, it's not going to work for too long. The only way you get people to take responsibility for their spiritual maturity is to teach them habits of faith. Once that happens, they become self-feeders. People follow Christ not because you've led them there, but because it's who they are. And so I get that. In that specific example, had trouble applying it to the Montgomery bus boycott, like you said. But I do think that there's some cool things that are happening there. So number one, like, you're encouraging people to develop these positive habits. And then number two, like, that maturity covenant card, I really like that idea, where everybody who's involved in this thing, like, knows what they've signed up for. And so there's social expectations that they're going to follow through and do those things. In a small level, I think that's kind of what we've done with Bookworm. Not that we're a movement, although maybe now we've read this, we could turn
need to study the habits of our listeners, and surely we can change the routine such that we become a movement.
Is Andrew Pohl available? No, just kidding.
Well, you tell me what to analyze, and I'll analyze it. How about that?
No, but we've kind of like, and this is off the cuff, so I may say something really stupid here, but we've kind of made a social contract that every 2 weeks we're going to read this book, and we're going to show up, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to have these action items. We're going to hold each other accountable to doing what we said we were going to do. And I know that there are some people who listen to this that have done the same sort of thing. They have their own action items. So they've kind of like bought into the social contract, even though there wasn't a formal process for them to do that. You know, and there's like the Bookworm Club that people can join to do that too. The t-shirts example, like, that's another example, I think, of like a community-led initiative. What's interesting comparing these two is like they're so, well, I shouldn't say they're so different, because in the Montgomery bus boycott, what Martin Luther King Jr. was preaching was to combat hate with love. And so that's interesting to me, given our current social situation in the United States, where you have police officers who are documented. Like, there was one even in Milwaukee not too long ago where they tased a Milwaukee Bucks player because he was in a Walgreens parking lot. And every time something like that happens, my heart breaks, because I find myself kind of caught in the middle, where I don't believe that every police officer is bad and we shouldn't trust the police. But on the other hand, I'm not an African-American male who is put in that situation. I can't tell everybody, hey, you know, it's going to be okay. This is the right response in this situation, which is what Martin Luther King Jr. did. You know, he was the example. People were throwing stuff through his windows, blew up his porch. You know, they said in this book that if his family had been in the front room, they would have died. You know, but he even told everybody, the whole mob that formed, like, we're gonna get those guys back. Like, he said, no, you can't do it that way. And when I read this, like, I found myself saying, we really need a Martin Luther King Jr. type character to lead real social change now. We need somebody who can channel the same strength that he did, and create a movement that achieves real results, but without warfare, you know? And again, like, I really can't directly impact that, because I'm not the one right in the middle of the conflict, but it makes me realize, I guess, hearing the story that they told, and obviously the changes that came about because of that, and then looking at our current situation, it stands out to me that, like, that's the missing piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think this, one of the things he talks about earlier on, what chapter was that? 3, when it was changing, like, how to change a habit. Essentially what's happening is, in a movement, you're trying to change a single habit, but he also mentions that you can only really, like, you should only focus on one at a time.
Yep.
Because if you try to do too many at one time, it's overwhelming. It's too much going on. And one of the things that Martin Luther did with Martin Luther King Jr., is they had a single target that they were after to fight against, and everyone united around that one person leading that movement towards that one goal.
True.
I think part of the problem that we see in a lot of our society today is there's a whole bunch of different targets that people are trying to hit, and there's not a single leader on them. And essentially, it's too much at one time. So it means everybody's frustrated in some way. A whole bunch of people are angry because they feel like everyone should come together and unify over this thing, but the thing that everybody wants is different. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of these different targets that people are after, but it can't be unified because the targets are so different that it can't become one movement. So you essentially have multiple of them running all at once, and then it just doesn't work because you're trying to change too many things at one time. Whereas the civil rights movement, it was so much targeted towards directly one thing, and absolutely everyone got on board with that one target. So that, I think, is the thing that's missing in our society today. I think if they could change that, which I'm not really sure how they would do. I'm no civil rights movement creator here, but to me, that's the fundamental flaw in what's going on today.
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things there. So there's obviously the approach that I shared, where like Martin Luther King Jr. was a great man, great example of how you can affect positive change and created a movement. But also at the very beginning of this book, there's a totally different solution to to violence, which is interesting. I forget the country that this happened in, but basically there were these two sides, and they would meet every evening in this square in Kigali, Kigali, and they would fight. And every night, there's police there, and they're trying to keep the peace, and they can't. There's always violence, like every single night. And some guy shows up and he's like, "Oh, I know how to make it stop. Just remove all of the kebab vendors from the square." And Sure enough, like you remove the food and then people just leave because they're hungry and there's no more violence. So in essence, they controlled crowds with their habits. And I'm not saying that this, the Montgomery bus boycott, current situation, social situation in the United States can be solved the same way, but there are multiple triggers here. And it's interesting to think that you can affect pretty significant change simply by changing a simple habit.
We got one more chapter?
One more, yep. Chapter 9, the neurology of free will. In this chapter, I don't know, it talks about all of the different things that are created by habits that maybe people think of negatively. So it tells a story about a lady who's addicted to gambling, tells another story about a guy who murders his wife while sleepwalking. And so there's all these different examples of these habits. And he also shares, like, there's different cases that have been brought against these people. So in the case of the guy who ended up murdering his wife while he was sleepwalking, he had no idea that he did it. He was declared innocent. But the lady who still has this habit that she, quote unquote, can't control, and she gambled away all this money, and she owes the casino tens of thousands of dollars, like, she's guilty. And so the question that he phrases here is it fair, since habits are so automatic and they're all kind of constructed the same, is it fair to say that the guy who murdered his wife is innocent while this lady who owes the casino $30,000 or whatever, she's guilty? I don't really know the easy or correct answer to that. It does kind of tick me off, I guess, to know that gambling, like the people who deal with this, they're going, and they do go to the casino, and that is an example of a cue and a routine that they could potentially change. But it kind of ticks me off that once they get there, everything in there is designed to manipulate these habits to get them to the point that this lady was in, where their life is completely destroyed. But the big takeaway for me in this section is that your habits are not your destiny. He kind of ends it on a positive. You can change your habits if you know how, but you've got to decide to change it, and it's going to take some hard work.
I don't know how I feel about this chapter. I think I tend to be one who thinks you should own up to your actions, like own up to what you do. Whether, if it's the classic, if you're a recovering alcoholic, don't go to a bar.
Yep.
Like,
exactly.
You're the one that's in control of that. So saying that she's not responsible for the money that she gambled away, like, I don't have a problem with casinos building themselves such that they are designed to help you give your money away to them. Like, I don't mind them doing that because you're the one that went in there. Like, that is their business. Like, you're the one that walked in. If that's your problem, don't go in. Like,
but what about this lady where like she was trying to get clean and they're like calling her house and they're showing up and they're like, hey, come on over and we'll pay for everything. Like, I think there's got to be a line there somewhere. Where do you think that line is?
I guess my question is why, or maybe not why, but how do they know how to get a hold of her? I mean, she's obviously given her information to them at some point.
That was the response I had too.
It seems like, if you don't want these things, like if you don't want that invitation, I don't know very many instances where someone has the ability to communicate with you that you can't stop it. Like, I'm sitting here trying to run through my head. Like, there's people who ignore the do not call list, and they will call you even when they're not supposed to. People will mail you when you don't want it. But these are things that are easy to just ignore or delete or throw away. I can't help but think she invited this. Maybe that's just me being hard.
No, I think you're probably right because again, you've only got part of the story. But it does kind of tick me off that there are these rules and guidelines in place. But like you said, there are going to be people who are going to ignore the do not call list. There are going to be people who are going to send you spam. There are going to be people who are going to mail you stuff even after you tell them, don't send me anything ever again. And like, that just seems wrong.
Yeah.
Given what we know about these habits and the fact that they're preying on these people illegally, quote unquote, how can they get away with that?
Well, not everyone's clean, Mike.
I know. Yeah.
I wish I had a clean answer, but I don't.
Yeah, like I said, this chapter is kind of depressing because they share all these stories of people who have kind of lost everything because of their habits. But it does end positively, like I said, because you can change your habits if you want to. One important point I think they made in this last chapter is that if you believe you can change, the change can become real if you make it a habit. So it's kind of like things are created twice. First in your mind, then in reality. But if you want to create it in reality, the way to do that is through establishing the habit that's going to produce the right reward to get you where you want to go.
I like that. I feel like that's a good place to stop.
All right, cool.
But you got another miscellaneous here.
Yeah, this actually didn't fit in with anything that he said in this particular book, but my gap book for this time was Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey, which is not out yet.
Is it good?
It's a good read, and he talks in there about the different ways that you can focus. He has this powerful visual of like your attentional space. So it's like this circle, and then you can fill it different ways. And if you really want to get major progress done on a particular task or project, then you just focus on that one thing. But he shares all these different scenarios. And one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that you can work on a task intently and make progress on it while activating an automatic habit in the background. So, and we've kind of talked about this roughly, on other podcast episodes where like you listen to a podcast while you're mowing the lawn or whatever. And that is an example, I think, of how you can effectively, quote unquote, multitask, but the only way to do it is through establishing these habits. Not sure I explained that real well, but an important point, like we think that we tend to think, I think anyways, in the productivity space where there's so much emphasis on deep work and focus and all that stuff, that like you have to be laser focused on one thing at a time. Really what Chris Bailey is saying is that no, if you create these habits, you can actually do those alongside one task that you are focusing on. And the challenge to me, as I'm reading that other book, Hyperfocus, is what are the things that I can do that will produce the results I want? How can I make them habits? So we talked about some of them in this episode, the morning routine, the journaling reflection at the end of the day. And kind of what I'm thinking is that there's ways to kind of automate some of that stuff. And I want to figure out how to do that using, obviously, the cue, routine, reward that we learned about in this book.
All right, let's see if I understand what you're saying here. And I'm going to do this via an example of something I do, because I think this might explain what you're talking about. Sometimes when I'm doing development, like when I'm writing code for a website, I'll sometimes work on 2 different websites at the same time, which sounds like chaos. But what happens is I'm working on one, and a part of that process is at some points I need to stop the local website that I'm running and clear the cache or the database and then restart it. So simple process there. But that restart process can sometimes take 30 seconds to 45 seconds, depending on the size of the website. And you're just waiting. You're just waiting for that to happen. So it's all muscle memory. I don't even know what the commands are to do all of that. It just happens. But I will run those commands to stop the server and run it again. And then as soon as I tell it to run again, I'll switch over and work on the second website while I'm waiting for that to spin up. And I'll do kind of the same thing. I'll make a couple small tweaks. I have a pretty good feel for when that other server should be up and running. And once I feel like it's up and running, I'll quit the second website and go back to the first one and continue my testing and debugging and stuff from there. So I'm kind of multitasking because I'm working on 2 things at once, but it's because I have that delay that I'm waiting on something. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. I think that's a good example. So he talks about 3 combinations that work with the attentional space that you have available. So first, you can do a few small habitual tasks. Second, you can do a task that requires most of your focus plus a habitual task. I believe what you just described falls into that category. Or you could just do one complex task. And so the challenge for me, because we just read The Power of Habit, he's talking about how you can create habitual tasks. What are the things that I can create into habitual tasks that are things that I want to do? So I guess, are there things that I do currently that I view as a complex task that I have to laser focus on this thing? Or can I shift those things so that they become habits and institute cues, routines, and rewards to accomplish the results that task would give me, but also reduce the cognitive load to actually do it? Does that make sense?
It does. I think I get what you're saying, I think.
So in your example, booting up the other server, whatever, like that not complex task that you've got, you know exactly how to do it, and you can do it almost automatically, and you can do something else while that's happening at the same time. That's an example of a task that probably was a complex task for you at one point, but you've made it a habitual task.
Right.
And so you can do that while doing something else. I want to look for those things in the way I work.
Yeah. No, that's probably a good example, because I went and, while you were talking, I pulled up my command line history for one of those websites where I was doing that and realized it's 4 different commands that I'm running, which if you've never done that before, it would probably take you a little bit to know what order to do that in and when to do that. But I don't even think about it. I couldn't really tell you when to do that just because it's second nature at this point.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. I've never thought about that as multitasking, but it is something that I do. Fun times. Anything else on the book, Mike?
No, other than I think we're probably agreed, but I'll ask you anyways because you have one of these questions down. What did you think was the most impactful part of the book? For me, it was definitely the first part of this. By the time we got to the second part, especially once we got to the Starbucks teaching willpower, and that's why everybody was successful, I was kind of tuning out.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I know. I would say what I think is the most impactful point of this book is probably chapter 3. I think understanding how habits work, like the cue, routine, reward, that piece is helpful. But to me, understanding how do you change an existing habit or develop one, like just knowing that process, I feel like could have the biggest payoff. A close second to that would be Keystone Habits. I think those two pieces were the ones that really jumped out to me, and that I felt like I read those chapters and kind of wanted them to keep going.
Right.
But they were done too quick.
I think that's true. I would add to that the Power of Crisis, chapter 6, and then chapter 1, the Habit Loop. This is a really powerful idea. One thing I forgot to mention, he kind of really briefly talked about how researchers had come up with this habit loop, but the way he positions it the rest of the book feels kind of like he's ripping off their idea, and he doesn't give them full credit for it. Again, this is an example of me knowing the full story as opposed to just the part that he tells.
Yeah.
But basically, I think it was Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and there were a couple researchers that came up with this key routine reward. And he just briefly mentions like, yeah, researchers have identified, this, and then he kind of runs with it.
Yeah.
And he's like, the only visuals in this book are where he plugs in the different pieces for this to go along with the story that he's telling. And I kind of, by the end of the book, it's easy to forget that Charles Duhigg isn't the one who came up with this. But it's important to clarify that, I think.
Yeah. What pieces of this book do you think could have been pulled out? Like, which ones do you think he should have skipped? Because it's a pretty long book, page count wise. What is it, like 270 something?
Yeah.
I just threw stuff all over my desk. I feel like most books should be around 200. That's kind of been my working theory lately, which would tell me there's about 75 pages here that could probably have been pulled out.
Yeah. So I think all of part 1 was good. From part 2, chapter 4, and chapter 6, you could probably cut chapter 5, chapter 7, and then part 3, I think, was definitely the weakest part. Because again, like the question that I had was, how do we implement this? It's great to know, based on some historical examples, why he thinks, Saddleback Church was successful or the Montgomery bus boycott was successful. But how does that help now? And I for a thought experiment, applied it to a current situation, and there is no easy answer. It's not as simple as just, pick a new routine.
Yeah.
You can't communicate that to millions or billions of people at once and get everybody to buy into it right away. So I think from a practical, applying what you're reading perspective, that part really doesn't add a whole lot.
Fair point. I feel like you could just drop part 3. Like, I would be happy with that, because if you drop part 3, it's at 212. Like, okay, just do that. Drop those last 2 chapters and call it good. I'd be good with that.
Exactly. Interestingly, what do you think the impact would be? This is a New York Times bestselling book, so we're telling a New York Times bestselling author how they should do it differently.
Because we have the authority to do that, right?
Yeah. But what do you think would be the impact if this book was just the 2 sections? I mean, I see this a lot in the books that we read, that there's like 3 different sections. The Morton Hansen book, I think, too, was 3 different sections.
Right.
And I'm sure that there's some, marketing-based habit manipulation going on there where it's like, oh, there's 3 sections. They must have really thought this through.
Right. I also wonder, because there's also, like, there's usually a multiple of 3 in number of chapters. This one was 12, right? And I always think that's
9.
That play, or no, it was 9.
3 in the first part, 4 in the second, 2 in
9.
the last one.
Right. And I would imagine they struggled to put 4 in the second and tried to move 1 to 3. I would imagine they had a fight over that, but I think you're right. I think there's something to that. Most books have 3 parts. Like, there's something in our mind that, that is the normal way that people form books. And my sense is that most authors probably don't structure it that way. They just have, here's my book. And then publishers want to sell it, so then they throw a marketing spin on it, and then we get 3 parts. And if there's not 3 parts worth in the original, they add one, and it's usually that last one. And it's the last one that we always feel like we should cut. So I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, I think I have a partial answer to this from the Chris Bailey book, which, I'm not going to quote him exactly because book's not out yet, and maybe it'll even change. But he does talk about how this whole idea of attentional space, like it's essentially the RAM in your computer's brain, and it can only handle so much, which is why chunking works and stuff like that. But I think that there's probably patterns and habits that people have established that, like, yeah, readers can wrap their head around the overall message of this book better when it's broken up into these 3 different sections. But I do think it's interesting that a lot of the books that we read the whole thing, and then we're like, yeah, this part really shouldn't even be here. So, I mean, I know they've got reasons for doing it, but I just think it's interesting how often we have that reaction.
So that said, what else we have here? Action items?
Yep.
We've talked about them for the most part. You just want to summarize yours quick? I'll summarize mine.
Sure. So the habit loop, the cue routine reward, that's something that I want to apply to all of my current routines and habits. I want to identify what they are and then figure out what changes I want to make. Change them one at a time, not a whole bunch of things at once. And then one thing specifically, which we mentioned, the fast food. I don't want to say like completely cut it out, because I don't think that's the right approach. The right approach is not just saying, okay, no more fast food. The right approach is figuring out the cue routine and the reward, and figuring out what I can do to circumvent that when it happens. But the net result I'm going for is no more fast food.
It's a good one. I like that one.
Specifically, no more Culver's. Double butter burger with cheese curds.
Sorry, Culver's. Sorry, Mike. That's going to be a tough one. I'll definitely make sure that's on the list for next time. And maybe the following. And the following. And the following. No, I want to follow you on the identifying what my current routines and habits are. I think that there's something valuable in that. And I think that might be it'll be an ongoing thing. I think you're always going to be finding more and more of them. So that was number 1. 2, I've done this somewhat with moving my phone down in my office and changing up my morning routine a little bit because of that, and getting away from some of those bad habits as a result. That was 2. And third one here, I don't think I talked about this earlier, but there are certain points in my day, and I know when they happen. They usually involve me finishing up a round of email, but those points in the day are a little more stressful than normal. And because of that stress, I have a tendency to kind of be chaotic with the tasks that I'm doing, and it's hard for me to focus on one, and I bounce all over the place. So because of that, I know that something that calms me down is to just take 15 minutes and read. So I'm wanting to build in this habit of, after finishing up email, like my rounds of email, taking 15 minutes to read from whatever book I'm reading at the time. So that's a habit I want to build in.
I like that one.
That should be a good one. I'm excited about that one. We'll see how well it actually holds true, though. But that said, author's style and rating. So on this one, like, I'll go first here since it was my choice. But we've talked a lot about how he wrote this book, I think, probably more so than we normally do. I think the technicals on him as a writer, he's a great writer, I think. I just think his choice of structure is a little bit difficult to stick with, and I feel like there are some points where that structure inhibits his ways of conveying the ideas, and it makes it a little bit hard to follow once in a while. So although I love the concept of, building habits and how do you change them and such, I think I resonated a lot more with the individualization side of it, more so than the organizational and societal sides. So I don't really know where I would want to put it. So it seems like my de facto I don't know rating is 4. So I'm going to put it at 4.0 just because it's definitely not a 5. I feel like 3.5 is kind of lame because I feel like it has more of an impact on me than that. And 4.5 seems too high for that. So I'm going to land it on 4.
All right. Interesting. I am going to go 3.5, even though it's lame.
Okay. Fair enough.
Part of the reason for that is, like I said, I was familiar with a lot of these stories and a lot of these ideas. I mean, to be fair, the key routine reward, he does a great job of presenting it in this book. And if this is the first time you have encountered that idea, it's really powerful. But I work for a company in Asian deficiency that teaches a rituals course on this stuff. So I kind of get it. And I've been implementing it for a while before we read this. So take that into consideration. Also take into consideration my strong reaction to his lack of giving emotional intelligence credit for Starbucks' success. But I really think that there wasn't that much in this book that really significantly impacted me. There's some really cool mental models, and it's definitely something that I'm going to apply. But that habit loop idea, which again wasn't even his original idea, like that's the big takeaway from me. It's not the societal stuff. It's not even the organizational stuff. There is some cool stuff in there, but the book could have been half as long in my opinion. So I do think it's a good book. I do think I would recommend it to people. But in terms of the impact that it had on me and how much I enjoyed it compared to all of the other books that we've read, I think 3.5 is very fair.
That's fair. That is fair. All right. So what's up next, Mike?
The next book is a listener recommendation, not just my wife, although she did vote for it, and that is Boundaries by Henry Cloud. And this is one that, before we recorded this, you mentioned that you really enjoyed this the first time that you read it. So it'll be interesting to hear how that maybe has changed for you. And I'm excited to dive into it. I've heard lots of great things about this book.
Yeah, I'm excited to go through this one. And I think this will be a rare case that I'm going to have a bunch of stories on this one. Just because I read it 9 years ago and I still recommend it to people. So, yes, I have lots to say about this book. I'm excited that you picked it.
Interesting.
So it'll be a good one. Following Boundaries, we'll jump into Work Clean by Dan Charnas. This is also a listener recommendation. It wasn't the next top voted one, but it was up there. So I'm not really sure why I was drawn to it, but it's one that I've seen around here and there. I'm not going to explain it more than that. But Work Clean by Dan Charnas. That's after Boundaries.
Nice. I have never heard of this book.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Right. For Get Books, I've got on my desk right here, Turning Pro by Stephen Pressfield. Tap your inner power and create your life's work, which was definitely a big fan of the War of Art. This looks like it's written in the same style, so fairly short, easy read.
Nice. I don't have a Gap book this time. Kind of lame, I know, but things have been crazy. I've had some time off, taking some more time off, which you would think would lead me to reading more. But in the first case, like being gone at Macstock, I read almost none. Macstock is busy for me. This upcoming, I think I'll end up having extra books that I will have read. So I might have multiple Gap books next time. We'll see.
All right. So if you want to recommend a book, you can do that at the Bookworm Club, which is club.bookworm.fm. It's a awesome forum created by our own discourse expert, Joe Bulig. Woo! So go join the club. You can also see a list of all of the books that are upcoming at bookworm.fm/list. You also see a list of books that we have covered, as well as some links to Amazon affiliate links. So if you want to go back and buy a book and you want to support the show, that gives us a little bit of kickback, so we can pay Joe to host the files and edit them and everything. So everybody go pay Joe and buy some books via Amazon.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yes, join the club, club.bookworm.fm. That's where we hang out and talk about some of these books. I wrote this down a little bit earlier about the club. I don't know if this is a good idea or not. You mentioned that some people have their own action items from these books. I would love to hear those. Maybe that's weird, but I think that would be cool. So if you have action items from this book, The Power of Habit, go share them on the episode link. I'll make sure that's in the show notes for this episode. Just click the discuss on the club and then share your action items there. We can help with the accountability thing, I think. We'll try it. See how it goes. I think that'd be kind of cool. Don't you, Mike? I think that would be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, do that. Another way you can support the show is on iTunes. You put something in the show notes here about this?
I did. This is a review that P. Stanash has left us, which says that this podcast has completely changed the way that I take notes when I read books with ideas I'm trying to master. I also try to come up with at least 3 action items from each book. What? So P. Stanash, you should definitely go share those action items with us. I've added numerous books to my to-read list after listening to this podcast, and I've gone back to read some books over and over again with a new perspective. If you enjoy reading books on productivity and personal development, I strongly recommend this podcast. So thank you, P. Stanash, for the review, and everybody else. That's a way that you can support the show.
Yes. So leave us an iTunes review. Link in the show notes. That'll make it easy.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Next book up is Boundaries by Henry Cloud, and we will talk to you next time.